In this video, which I am going to call Sweater Quilt 2, I'm going to try and explain a quilt pattern to you. I had mentioned recently in an answer to a post on my YouTube videos that it's a little difficult for me to make videos right now because I'm moving and I recently had to get a wheelchair. I have a leg injury. So everything for this video is kind of right on the chair here, and I hope you don't mind me doing it this way this time. The question that the person had asked was to show a better way of cutting up the fabric for my sweater quilt pattern, cutting up the knitted sections. And I don't have any sweaters to cut up right now, and as I said, it's hard to make videos. But this is a quilt I'm working on that actually is, the idea came from painting. I'm an artist, I've been an artist for a long time, and I'm making several quilt sets for veterans, and each one I'm doing a painting. And I think what's going to end up happening with me is that I get to keep the painting and they get the quilt set. But I have one called Bluebirds, or it's based on bluebirds, and so I needed to do a bluebird painting, and as you can see, I have a 6 by 8 inch canvas there. Now, I've also used 6 by 8. It's a really good size. I've used it for whale paintings, I've used it for florals. You can do a lot with that size, even though it seems limited by being long and narrow. In the meantime, I was thinking about the sweater quilt, and believe it or not, an item called a pink neelix. Now, anybody who watches or has watched Star Trek Voyager, there's an episode toward the end of all their seasons where they have to evacuate, and Neelix won't leave behind the blankets that his mother knit for him because it's all he has left of his mother, and he just won't get off the ship without his blankets. And anyway, so I can relate to that completely, and having knitted items from my mother. And so what I'm doing is knitting a pink neelix to go on the backing of fabric, and this is going to give me a couple of things. First of all, because the quilt sets that I'm talking about are more or less for homeless veterans, and they don't have a wall to hang a painting on, if the paintings go with them, a cloth painting or a painting on cloth is obviously better, a better way to give them a piece of art. But I like to paint on cloth anyway. So the 6 by 18 is the format. The pink neelix is going to be a backing similar to the sweater quilt, but it will be knit specifically for that width. Now, 6 inches wide, I wanted to have a little bit of extra on either side so that it'd probably be a rag edge, so I didn't want it to be exactly 6 inches. So those are size 11 needles with bulky weight yarn, cast on 25 stitches, and knit and garter stitch for 18 inches. Now in the meantime, it's a little crooked, but I have taken a scrap piece of fabric, in this case it's denim, and that's going to be the fabric front. Now, I had this denim, and I also have another project going on with my jeans. I have jeans and overalls that need to be cut up. You can probably get these pieces of fabric out of old jeans and overalls if you want to do this project. So here are how you can put an image on the fabric to make it a painting that then gets sewn into a quilt. So you'll be knitting however many sections of this you want to make. You'll be knitting a knit backing for it. This, I started with 4 ounces of bulky, and I'm not sure if I'll make it to 18 inches. So I might need like 5 or at the most 6 ounces of bulky, and like I said, size 11 needles, cast on 25 stitches, and knit to 18 inches. Now, on your fabric, depending on the fabric that you have, the first one I'm going to do, like I said, is bluebirds. And I already have a block design of bluebirds. So I'm going to use, I'm going to mix dark blue and white paint and make bluebird color paint. I'm going to put, it's acrylic paint on this block. I'm using fairly thick paint, about the consistency of pudding, and I'll use the rubber brayer that's used for block printing, and I will ink this block with that paint, and then I'm going to block print the bluebirds on there. Acrylic paint will dry very quickly, within 24 hours. If you use Shiva Paint Stix and do a freehand drawing or painting, that will also dry within 24 to 36 hours. Now, another option, or a couple more options, one is to use chalk. So here are the paints, the acrylics. This is Dick Blick acrylic, artist acrylic. Now, somewhere here I have a piece of chalk. I can, or you can, depending on your fabric, and I'm holding the camera and not really looking at what I'm doing, but draw a bluebird, a flower, you know, anything you want, you can draw in here. And then hand quilt it. And it becomes a hand quilted painting. And then another option is to use, this is block printing ink, but this is washable. There's block printing fabric ink that is more or less permanent, but has to be washed in cold water, and that needs to dry for a week after you put it on the fabric. This is block printing ink for paper, which, again, I could make it gray so it's more visible on the blue, and I could block print images on here, hand quilt them, and then when I wash it, this will wash out, and I will have a block printed image. I mean a hand quilted image. So very many ways that you can take your idea or your block printing art or rubber stamps and stamp it on there with any of these more or less permanent ways. And then take this piece after you've done that and trim it to fit the knitting. It'll probably be about 8.5 by 19, and mark the edges with a consistent seam allowance so that each finished piece is 6 by 18. And then sew the fabric to the knitting just by placing this on the back. Use your machine to sew on the fabric side and just go all the way around the 4 sides, and you have a panel that can also be a painting. It can be a blankie. It can be a lot of things. It could even be like a floor cloth at your front door. So there's a lot you can do with this. Now, 6 by 18, as I said, I use that size for paintings. If I put 2 of those together, we're looking at 1 yard wide. If I put 3 of them together in a row with the short sides sewn together, I have almost a twin size quilt. And because you'll know how wide they are, you could do maybe 30 stitches and make it 10 inches wide, and then you just add rows depending on how long you want your quilt. So 6 by 18 or 10 by 18, it gives you a way to make consistent size knitting backed panels with either quilting or free motion quilting with a machine, or painting or block printing, and take those consistent blocks and use them to assemble a quilt. It's very similar to any other quilting, except you're using a rectangle and I would think the most you would go left to right would be 4 sections for like a full or king-size bed maybe. But it also lets you really design your quilt. And then on top of it, if you use your old jeans, or let's say your son went off to college or your daughter went off to college and they left all their old jeans behind, what a wonderful way to make a memory quilt. And all you'd have to do is knit the backings. So I think it's a great idea. It's going to be one of not only a painting for the Bluebird set, but I also have another quilt that I'm calling We the People. And so this will probably be how We the People ends up being done. So it's technically Sweater Quilt number 2. And the knitting does not have to be cut up if you knit it to size to your panel. And size 11 needles, bulky weight yarn. I bought a huge box of bulky weight yarn on eBay. It's all acrylic. It's all vintage, made in America. Craft lot yarn for $12. And I got 62 4-ounce skeins out of it. So there's a quilt. And, excuse me, it was $12 plus shipping. That I've gone through like 15 different ideas of what I could use that acrylic yarn for. So, but this, it will get used for some of this. If you want to stick to American products, Red Heart Super Saver or Red Heart Classic yarns are made in America of imported materials. It's very hard to find American-made yarns. But Red Heart Super Saver is an acrylic that you can use double strand and use as a bulky to back these. So with that, and with old jeans, or even, I used to have a denim dress, and I loved the denim dress. I should have kept it. I ended up finally giving it away. But it was a full-skirted denim dress. I could have gotten 6 or 7 panels out of that dress. So this is another way to repurpose fabric. In this case, as opposed to the other sweater quilt, you're knitting your knitted fabric to fit your fabric section, your woven fabric section, but you have all kinds of options on how you can decorate the sections. You can even use, I was thinking glitter paint, but they have acrylic paint in a tube, not in a tube, in a squeeze bottle. So you could do just random abstract designs with squeeze bottle acrylic paint that'll stay on there. So the possibilities are endless. And I'm starting with a 6x18 panel and then adding sections depending on how big I want the quilt. So Sweater Quilt 2.